grave whisper.
I didn't believe in haunted ships when I first stepped on to the RMS Queen Mary. I was 29, broke and desperate for steady work. When a friend told me they needed overnight staff aboard a permanently docked ocean liner in Long Beach, California, I didn't hesitate. Historic hotel, tourist attraction, easy money. That's what I saw. What I didn't see, at least not yet, was the way the ship breathed after midnight. My first night shift began just before 11 p.m. The crowds were gone, the gift shops locked, the bars quiet. The Queen Mary sat still in the harbor, massive and dark, her rust-red hull reflecting broken lights off the water. From the outside, she looked peaceful, almost elegant. Inside was another story. The moment I walked through the crew corridor, the air changed. It was colder than it should have been, thick with the smell of old metal, oil, and something faintly sweet like decaying flowers. My footsteps echoed longer than expected, as if the walls were listening. The supervisor handed me a radio and a map of the lower decks. "Stick to your assigned areas," he said, "and don't wander." That last part stuck with me. Everyone knew the rumors. Crew members talked about them in low voices. The little girl near the swimming pool, the sailor in the engine room, the screams that sometimes echoed from empty hallways. I chalked it up to stress, imagination, and people wanting attention. At midnight, I started my patrol. The Queen Mary is a maze, narrow stairwells, endless corridors, doors that look identical no matter how long you stare at them. Down on Deck B, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath fogged the air. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. They were slow, heavy, measured, coming behind me. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. I turned around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hallway behind me was empty. No shadows, no movement, nothing, just metal walls and closed cabin doors. I laughed, nervous, and kept going. That was my first mistake. As I reached the old indoor swimming pool, the radio on my belt crackled to life with static. No voices, just static. Then, clear as day, a sound came from the pool room. A splash. The pool has been dry for decades. I stepped closer, shining my light across the tiled floor. The blue tiles gleamed back at me, cracked and faded, empty, silent. Then I heard a child laugh, soft, playful, wrong. Every hair on my arms stood up. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed away slowly, whispering to myself that it was nothing, pipes settling, wind, anything but what it felt like. As I turned to leave, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Wet footprints, small ones. They led from the edge of the empty pool straight towards me. I didn't run. I should have, but fear froze me in place as the footprints stopped inches from my boots. The air grew icy, and the smell of chlorine, strong and sharp, filled my nose. Then, right next to my ear, I heard a whisper. "Why did you leave me here?" I bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't radio in. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, not stopping until I reached a lit stairwell with security cameras. I spent the rest of the night sitting under fluorescent lights, telling myself I imagined it. But when my shift ended at sunrise, I checked my boots. They were wet, and they smelled like chlorine. That was my first night aboard the Queen Mary. It wouldn't be my last. I told myself what happened near the pool was exhaustion. That's the lie you tell when the alternative feels impossible. By the time my second overnight shift came around, I had convinced myself the Queen Mary was just an old ship full of strange noises and darker corners. History does that to places. It gets inside your head. I even laughed about it on my drive in, calling myself stupid for being scared of footprints and whispers. Then they assigned me to the engine room levels. The engine room aboard the Queen Mary is massive, even now, a cathedral of steel. Towering turbines frozen in place, pipes twisting like veins along the walls, ladders disappearing into shadows far above and below. During the war, these engines pushed the ship faster than any submarine could catch her. They also killed people. At least 49 crew members died aboard the Queen Mary, some crushed, some burned, some lost in accidents that were quietly written off as the cost of wartime urgency. The most infamous death was a young sailor crushed by a watertight door during a drill. His name was officially recorded, but his screams were never documented. I descended the metal stairs just after 1 a.m. Every step rang out too loud, echoing back at me in distorted patterns. The deeper I went, the warmer it got, but not in a comforting way. The air felt stale, heavy, as if it hadn't moved in years. My radio crackled again, static, then, faintly, something else, a rhythmic thumping. At first, I thought it was machinery expanding or contracting. Old ships do that. But this sound had a pattern, a pause, 3 beats, another pause, like someone pounding on metal. I followed the sound to the lower engine platforms. My flashlight swept across gauges frozen at 0, rusted levers and shadows that seemed too thick to belong to nothing. The thumping grew louder the closer I got to a sealed, watertight door. That's when the smell hit me. Burnt oil, hot metal, sweat, fresh. I reached the door just as the pounding stopped. Static rushed in so suddenly my ears rang. Then I heard breathing, slow, labored, panicked. It was coming from the other side of the door. I raised my radio, my hand shaking. "Hello?" I said. My voice echoed back at me, thin and weak. "This is security. Identify yourself." The breathing turned into sobbing, then a voice, young, male, trembling. "Don't close it again." My heart slammed against my ribs. There was no one scheduled down here, no tours, no maintenance crews, no reason for anyone to be behind that door. "I can't get out," the voice said. "They said it was just a drill." I stepped back, panic rising. "Sir, stand by. I'm calling this in." The radio screeched with static so loud I dropped it. When it fell, the flashlight beam shifted just enough to illuminate something etched on the door. Handprints pressed into the metal, not rust stains, not grease. Handprints. They were scorched black. The sobbing turned into screaming. The door began to vibrate violently, shaking in its frame as something slammed against it from the inside. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, my mind screaming at me to run. Then, The screaming cut off instantly. The warmth drained from the room. The air turned icy. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The door stopped moving. I stood there for what felt like hours, shaking, staring at that sealed piece of steel. Eventually, my radio crackled back to life. "Security, status check," the dispatcher said, calm and bored. I didn't answer. I couldn't. When I finally forced myself to move, I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold. The handprints were gone, but on the floor in front of the door, dragged through a thin layer of dust, were fresh marks, boot marks leading away from the door and stopping right behind me. After the engine room, I tried to quit. I stood in the security office at 6 a.m., hands still shaking, telling my supervisor I wasn't cut out for overnight work. I didn't mention the voice, the handprints, or the boot marks. I just said I hadn't slept and needed something easier. He listened, nodded, then slid a clipboard across the desk. "We're short tonight," he said. "One more shift." I should have walked out. Instead, I signed my name. That night, my assignment included cabin B340. Every employee knows that number. Guests ask for it like a dare. Some stay the night and laugh it off. Others don't make it past midnight. The cabin has been closed more times than any other room on the ship, reopened, renovated, and closed again. Officially, there's nothing wrong with it. Unofficially, people say the room doesn't like being watched. I reached B deck just after 2 a.m. The corridor lights hummed softly, casting yellow halos along the carpet. B340 sat at the end of the hallway, its door slightly darker than the others, as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. My radio crackled as I approached. Static, then silence. The door was unlocked. I know because I checked it myself. No resistance, no click. It opened like it was waiting. Inside, the cabin was cold, colder than the hallway. The air smelled old, like damp fabric and dust sealed away too long. 2 single beds sat neatly made. The bathroom mirror reflected the light wrong, bending it slightly at the edges. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me. Not slammed, closed, slowly. I spun around and grabbed the handle. It turned easily. I opened it, then closed it again, telling myself I was in control. That's when the light in the bathroom flicked on by itself. I froze. The mirror began to fog. At first, I thought it was temperature change. Then lines started forming in the steam. Letters, slow, deliberate. Get out. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I backed away, bumping into one of the beds. The mattress dipped beneath me as if someone else sat down at the same time. The room grew darker. I felt pressure in my chest, like the air had thickened. My ears popped. A low vibration filled the space, not loud enough to hear clearly, but strong enough to feel in my bones. Then the whispering started. Not one voice, many. They spoke over each other, too soft to understand, circling the room, brushing past my ears. I caught fragments. Why are you here? They never listen. Stay. The bathroom door slammed shut. The temperature dropped so fast my breath turned white. I stumbled toward the main door, pulling hard, but it wouldn't open. The handle rattled uselessly in my grip. Behind me, the bedsheets began to shift, slowly, deliberately, as if something unseen was crawling beneath them. I screamed.
The lights exploded to full brightness, blinding me. The pressure vanished, the whispering stopped, the door swung open so violently I fell into the hallway. I scrambled away, gasping, my radio shrieking with feedback. Other staff found me minutes later, sitting against the wall, pale and shaking. They asked what happened. I told them the truth, or at least part of it. The supervisor didn't look surprised. He just sighed and said, "It's worse when you're alone." They reassigned me after that. No more B deck, no more engine rooms, day shifts only. I thought that meant it was over, but the Queen Mary doesn't always keep what happens on board. Because when I got home that morning, I noticed something strange. My bathroom mirror was fogged, and written across it in a familiar hand were 2 words: "Still here."
After the incident in my apartment, I stopped telling myself the Queen Mary was just a workplace. It was attached to me now. I took the day shifts they offered, convincing myself that sunlight and tourists would keep whatever had followed me at bay. Families laughed on deck, cameras flashed. The ship felt almost alive again, like it remembered happier versions of itself. But children don't always belong where they're seen. It started with footsteps, light ones, running. I'd hear them echo down empty corridors during slow afternoons, always just out of sight. When I turned a corner, I'd catch movement, small shadows darting behind pillars or slipping into closed rooms. Other staff noticed too. Housekeeping talked about toys left where no children had been. Guests complained about giggling outside their cabins at night, even on decks closed to families. One tour guide refused to go near the first-class swimming pool anymore. That pool was older than the one on B deck. Marble floors, elegant railings, sunlight streaming in through tall windows during the day. Beautiful, empty. I was assigned to monitor it one afternoon after a guest claimed they'd seen a child standing at the deep end. When I arrived, the pool area was silent except for the faint hum of ventilation. Sunlight reflected off dry tiles, creating the illusion of moving water. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then I heard humming. A child's voice, soft, tuneless. It echoed strangely, bending around the marble walls. I followed the sound to the shallow end, my heart sinking with every step. "Hello?" I called. "You can't be in here alone." The humming stopped. Then a little girl's voice answered right behind me. "I'm waiting for my mom." I turned slowly. She stood near the pool steps, maybe 6 years old, wearing an old-fashioned white dress that clung to her frame like it was wet. Her hair hung in dark curls, dripping onto the tiles. But there was no water. "Where's your mother?" I asked, my throat dry. The girl tilted her head. Her eyes were too dark, reflecting nothing. "She said to stay," the girl replied. "She always says that." The temperature dropped, sharp and sudden. My breath caught in my chest. I took a step back and felt my heel slide. Wet tile. Water pooled around the girl's feet, spreading outward, soaking the marble. "I can help you find her," I said, lying through my fear. "What's your name?" The girl smiled. Her mouth opened wider than it should have. "She didn't come back."
The pool lights flickered. Reflections warped across the walls like waves. The smell of salt water and chlorine filled the air, thick enough to choke on. Then I saw them. More children, standing at the edges of the pool. Some were barefoot. Some wore outdated sailor outfits. Others looked burned, bruised, or pale as wax. None of them blinked. They all stared at me. "We're still waiting," one boy said. Another added, "They told us not to move." My radio screamed with static, then cut out completely. The water on the floor began to rise, creeping toward my ankles. I backed away, panic roaring in my ears. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry." The children's faces twisted, not angry, not sad, hungry. The water surged forward. I ran. Behind me, laughter echoed, high and joyous, like a game had just begun. I didn't stop until I reached the main deck, sunlight blinding me, tourists everywhere. The pool was dry when staff checked it. No water, no footprints, no children. That night, I dreamed of standing on deck watching families disembark. Parents held their children's hands, counting heads, laughing. And one by one, the children let go. They turned back toward the ship and stayed.
After the pool incident, I stopped walking anywhere alone. Day shifts only, public areas, cameras in sight. I kept telling myself that whatever lived in the shadows needed darkness to survive. That the ocean, the steel, the history, none of it could touch me in the open. I was wrong. The Queen Mary went to war in 1942, painted gray, lights blacked out, packed with more than 15,000 soldiers at a time. She was fast, silent, and dangerous, especially to anything that crossed her path, including her own escort. On October 2nd, 1942, the Queen Mary collided with the British cruiser HMS Curacoa off the coast of Ireland. The impact cut the smaller ship in half. Orders were clear: do not stop. Submarines were believed to be nearby. 337 men drowned. That night, I heard them. It was just after closing, tourists gone, the ship settling into its nighttime quiet. I was stationed near the outer deck when the wind shifted and carried a sound across the water. A ship's horn. Low, long, mournful. It came from the harbor. My stomach dropped. The Queen Mary's horn hasn't been operational for late-night testing in years. I knew that. Everyone did. Then it sounded again, closer this time. The water around the ship began to ripple, small waves tapping against the hull in uneven rhythms. I leaned over the railing, my flashlight cutting across the dark surface. That's when I saw them. Shapes beneath the water. Too many. Hands broke the surface, pale and reaching. Faces followed, blue-lipped, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. They drifted just below the surface, moving with unnatural purpose toward the hull. "Help us," a voice whispered. Not one voice, hundreds. My radio erupted with overlapping transmissions, voices shouting, crying, choking on seawater. Names repeated again and again. Some begged, some accused.
The horn blasted again, so loud it vibrated through my bones. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed along the railing despite the mild California night. My breath fogged as the water began to churn violently. One of the figures grabbed the whole ladder. Another followed. They began to climb. I staggered backward, heart racing, as soaked uniforms materialized before my eyes. Naval coats torn open, life vests half-fastened, bodies dripping black water onto the deck. Their faces were wrong. Some were crushed, some burned, some missing pieces that should have been there. All of them stared at me with the same question burning in their eyes. Why didn't you stop? The horn cut off abruptly. Silence crashed down so suddenly my ears rang. The water went still. The deck was empty. No bodies, no water, no frost. Just me, shaking, staring at the harbor. Security footage later showed nothing. No movement, no anomalies, no sound. But the maintenance crew found something the next morning. Salt water pooled along the edge of the deck, and a single naval button, corroded, heavy and cold, resting near the railing. I didn't keep it. I couldn't. That night, I dreamed of standing on the deck during the war. Soldiers packed shoulder to shoulder, their breath fogging the air. I felt the impact, the sudden jolt, the metal scream, the ship shuddering but never stopping. In my dream, men fell into the ocean, and I watched the Queen Mary sail on. When I woke, my ears were ringing, and somewhere far away across calm water, a horn sounded. Once.
By the 6th week, everyone knew something was wrong with me. I jumped at sudden noises. I checked mirrors too often. I refused to take shortcuts through service corridors, even when it meant walking twice as far. The Queen Mary hadn't just scared me, it had trained me. That's when I started hearing about him. The senior night staff spoke carefully, lowering their voices when they mentioned a figure seen on Deck C after midnight. Not a child, not a sailor, not one of the wandering spirits tourists like to photograph. They called him the Watchman. No one claimed to know what he was, only that he wore a long coat, moved with purpose, and never acknowledged anyone who tried to speak to him. Cameras never caught his face, only a tall silhouette passing through frame, always just outside the light. I laughed the first time someone mentioned him. Then I saw him. It was during a late afternoon shift that stretched longer than planned. Storm clouds rolled in from the Pacific, blotting out the sun early. By the time I reached Deck C, the ship was already dim, lights flickering in response to the weather. I heard footsteps ahead of me. Measured, even, familiar. I followed the sound around a corner and stopped cold. A man stood at the far end of the corridor, his back to me, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark officer's coat that fell below his knees. His posture was rigid, military. "Sir?" I called. He didn't turn. He began to walk, not away from me, toward the far wall, straight into it. I watched as his form passed through solid steel like smoke through air, vanishing completely. I stood there long after the footsteps faded. That night, I made the mistake of asking questions.
An older maintenance worker finally told me what he knew. Decades ago, a security officer had suffered a fatal heart attack while on rounds. His body wasn't found until morning, alone, mid-patrol. He didn't know he was dead, and maybe still doesn't. After that, I noticed the signs. Doors left unlocked that I knew I'd secured. Lights switched off behind me, a sense of being watched, not with curiosity, but with evaluation. One night, my radio crackled. Checkpoint missed. I froze. That phrase wasn't used anymore. It was from an old patrol system, phased out years before I was hired. "I'm on schedule," I replied, my voice tight. Silence. Then footsteps behind me. I turned slowly. The watchman stood inches away. Up close, he was worse. His face was pale and indistinct, like it hadn't fully formed. His eyes were dark voids, reflecting nothing. The smell of cold metal and ozone filled my lungs. "You are not cleared to be here," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. "I work here," I whispered. He leaned closer. "So do I." The corridor lights went out. In the darkness, I felt hands, not grabbing, not attacking, but adjusting, straightening my collar, pressing something heavy into my chest pocket. When the lights came back on, I was alone. My radio lay at my feet, silent. In my pocket was a brass checkpoint tag, obsolete, stamped with a number that hadn't existed in decades. After that, I never missed a patrol marker. Neither did he. Because sometimes, when I'm the last one left on a deck, I hear footsteps behind me, matching mine exactly, and I know I'm not the one leading anymore.
They say the Queen Mary hates renovations. I didn't believe that either until the walls started screaming. It began during a routine refit on the lower decks. Management wanted to modernize a section of crew quarters that hadn't been touched in decades. New wiring, new walls, fresh paint. Make it safe, make it clean, make it forget. I wasn't part of the construction crew, but security was assigned to monitor the area overnight. Too many tools left out, too many tight spaces, too many stories about workers refusing to come back after dark. The first night was quiet. The second night, the knocking started. It came from behind a sealed wall at the end of the corridor. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. The construction foreman swore it was pressure changes, pipes, old metal shifting. Then the knocking came again, this time closer, louder, desperate. By the third night, I was alone on watch when the sound changed. Scratching, long, dragging lines moving slowly behind the drywall, like fingernails trying to find purchase. I followed the noise to a section of wall that had been opened earlier that day and hastily sealed. The air there was freezing. My flashlight beam trembled as it passed over the wall and caught something wrong. The drywall bulged outward. It moved, a shape pressed from the inside, a shoulder, a head, a face stretching the surface like wet paper, a mouth opened wide, screaming silently as the wall rippled around it.
I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The screaming started then, not silent anymore. It poured through the corridor, layered voices overlapping in panic and pain. I smelled smoke, oil, salt water, blood. The wall split open, hands burst through, tearing at the drywall, ripping it apart. Arms followed, then faces, dozens of them stacked behind one another, crushed together in impossible angles. They weren't ghosts drifting freely, they were trapped. "Close it," they screamed. "Don't let the water in. It's too hot. We're still inside." I realized then what we'd uncovered. During the war, entire sections of the ship had been sealed during emergencies, fires, flooding, drills gone wrong. Not everyone made it out. Some compartments were closed and never reopened, their dead written off as missing. Until now. The temperature spiked suddenly, the corridor filled with heat so intense my skin burned. Red emergency lights flashed on by themselves. Steam poured from vents overhead. I felt hands grab my ankles, not pulling, holding, begging. "Stay," a voice sobbed. "We stayed." I screamed for help into my radio, but it only played back distorted echoes of my own voice, layered with screams that weren't mine. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The heat vanished, the screams cut off, the lights returned to normal. The wall was intact, perfect. No holes, no damage, no sign anything had happened. When the morning crew arrived, they laughed it off. No reports, no evidence, no reason to halt renovations. Except one thing, etched faintly into the wall, barely visible beneath fresh paint, were handprints, dozens of them, pressed outward, trying to escape. After that, the renovation was quietly canceled, no explanation given. They boarded the area up and locked it permanently. Some spaces on the Queen Mary are no longer on any map. But sometimes, when the ship is quiet and the air is just right, I still hear scratching, and I swear the walls breathe.
The lockdown happened on a Tuesday. That detail matters, because nothing ever happens on Tuesdays. No big events, no ghost tours, no late-night parties, just skeleton staff and quiet hallways. There were 6 of us on board that night. Security, maintenance, one night manager. At 11:47 p.m., every door on the Queen Mary locked at once. I was on Deck D when I heard the sound roll through the ship. Hundreds of metal clicks snapping shut in perfect unison. Elevators froze between floors. Emergency lights flicked on, bathing everything in red. My radio exploded with voices. "Who triggered lockdown? Control, respond. I'm trapped between decks. My door won't open." The night manager tried to override the system from the security office. Nothing worked. Key cards failed. Manual releases jammed. Even doors that weren't connected to the electronic system refused to budge, as if welded shut from the inside. Then the announcement system came on. Not the modern one, the old one. A distorted male voice echoed through the corridors, layered with static and age. "Crew, return to your stations." We froze. That message hadn't been used since wartime drills. "Ignore it," the manager said over the radio, trying to sound calm. "It's a malfunction." But the ship didn't agree.
The lights dimmed further. The temperature dropped. Somewhere deep below us, a horn sounded, not from the harbor, but from inside the ship. Footsteps began to echo through the corridors, lots of them, running, marching, boots striking metal in organized rhythm. Doors rattled as something passed by on the other side, testing each handle, checking each lock. One of the maintenance workers started crying over the radio. "They're lining up. They're standing outside my door." I could hear it too. Breathing. Dozens of breaths. Slow. Patient. The announcement crackled again. Lights out. The corridor went black. In the darkness, I felt the ship move. Not physically, but internally, like it was rearranging itself. Hallways felt longer. Turns didn't lead where they should have. My flashlight beam struggled to cut through the dark as if it were being swallowed. I tried to reach the stairwell. It wasn't there. In its place was a solid wall of steel, smooth, seamless, and cold to the touch. That's when the knocking started. Not from the walls, from the inside of the doors. A voice whispered through the metal, right at ear level. "You missed your station." Another voice joined it. So many missed their stations. The radio in my hand clicked on by itself. "Non-compliance noted," the watchman's voice said calmly. I ran. I didn't know where I was going anymore. The Queen Mary twisted around me, corridors looping back on themselves, doors leading to places that didn't exist. I passed the pool, full now, black water lapping at the edges. I passed B340, its door wide open, lights off, something breathing inside. Finally, I reached the outer deck. The doors opened. The outer air rushed in, warm and real. The harbor lights glittered like a promise. Then I saw the water. The ocean was gone. In its place was darkness, thick, endless, stretching in every direction. No horizon, no stars, just void. Behind me, footsteps approached. I felt hands on my shoulders, not rough, not violent, guiding. "Return to your station," 100 voices whispered. I screamed and lunged forward and slammed into cold metal. The deck was normal. The harbor was there. The doors behind me were open. My radio crackled with relieved voices. "Systems are back," the manager said shakily. "Lockdown cleared." No one could explain what happened. The official report blamed a power surge. But when we gathered afterward, silent and shaken, we all noticed the same thing. Every clock on the ship had stopped at 11:47 p.m., and none of them ever worked again.
After the lockdown, I turned in my resignation. No notice, no explanation, just a signature at the bottom of a form and a promise to never come back. Management didn't argue. They didn't even look surprised. They just nodded like they'd been waiting for it. My final shift was scheduled for the next afternoon. "Daylight only," I said. "I'm done after that." They agreed. The Queen Mary felt different that day, quieter than usual, not empty, but watchful. Tourists moved through the decks laughing, taking photos, unaware of the way the ship seemed to lean inward, listening. I finished my rounds early and stood near the gangway, watching the water shimmer in the sun. I felt lighter, knowing I was leaving, free. That's when the voice spoke. Not from behind me, from the ship itself. "You're abandoning your post." The sound vibrated through the metal beneath my feet, low and patient, not angry, not threatening, disappointed. "I don't belong here," I said quietly. "You do," it replied. "You listened." Images flooded my mind. Soldiers packed tight in corridors, children waiting by empty pools, hands pressed into walls, a man still walking his rounds because no one told him to stop. "They need witnesses," the voice said. "They fade without them." I felt pressure in my chest again, that familiar weight. The air smelled like oil and salt. Around me, the ship seemed to stretch, doors subtly shifting, hallways lengthening. "I can't stay," I whispered. "You already have," it said. I realized then what it wanted. Not possession, participation. To keep the stories alive, to walk the halls, to remember the dead so the ship wouldn't forget itself. The Watchman appeared at the far end of the deck, standing perfectly still. The children watched from behind railings. Shapes moved beneath the water beside the hull. They weren't hostile. They were waiting. "You don't have to die," the voice said gently. "Just don't leave." My radio buzzed one last time. "Final check," the dispatcher said. "Confirm exit." I looked at the gangway. Solid, bright, real. And I felt something tug at me, not physically, but emotionally. A sense of belonging twisted into obligation, guilt sharpened into responsibility. "If I go," I asked, "what happens to them?" The ship was silent for a long moment. Then, "They wait longer." I stepped forward, then stopped. "I'll tell their stories," I said, "but I won't stay." The pressure lifted. The air warmed. The figures faded one by one. The Watchman nodded once. The voice spoke softly, almost fond. "Then remember us correctly." I walked down the gangway without looking back. That night at home, I opened my laptop and began writing. Every detail, every name I could find, every voice I could still hear. And for the first time since stepping aboard the Queen Mary, I slept through the night. Almost. Because just before dawn, I heard it again. A familiar, patient whisper drifting through my room. "Final segment pending." I thought walking down that gangway for the last time meant I was free. I was wrong. The first night home, the air smelled of salt water. The walls creaked like steel. My apartment lights flickered in a pattern I had memorized aboard the ship. Slow, then fast, then pause. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion, that I had just been at a haunted ship and my mind was replaying everything. I had written everything down in detail. Every corridor, every voice, every child, every handprint pressed into walls, every spectral figure. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of footsteps in my hallway. Slow, deliberate, metallic. I sat up in bed. The radio from my Queen Mary shift, the old battered one I had kept, was on. Static filled the room, and then I heard the whisper, "You promised to remember." I froze. My apartment felt suddenly like the ship. The walls stretched and shifted subtly, and the air was colder than it should have been in California winter. I felt unseen eyes tracing me. Hands, phantom cold, brushed along my legs beneath the blankets. I ran to the kitchen. Nothing there. I returned to my bedroom. My bed had shifted. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. My laptop, where I had typed every story, was open.
The document I had saved on the Queen Mary's history now contained additions I hadn't typed, footnotes in my handwriting, names of sailors I had never seen, children whose presence I had only felt. The whisper came again. "Finish it." I realized then the truth. I had left the ship, but the ship had not left me. The Queen Mary didn't just haunt spaces, it haunted the people who bore witness to her past, and once it claimed your attention, it never let go. Weeks passed. I slept less. I typed constantly. I mapped the ship deck by deck in my mind. I spoke to former crew. I recorded stories from guests. All the while, at night, I felt the pressure of unseen bodies in my room. The watchman pacing silently, children standing in corners, faint reflections in mirrors I knew I hadn't been able to capture before. The worst part wasn't the ghosts themselves, it was the Queen Mary's patience, the slow, steady insistence that I remember everything correctly, that the dead aboard her, soldiers, sailors, crew, children, would not be erased from history. One night, I dreamt I was back on Deck B. The pool was full, the water black, rippling in unnatural ways. Faces emerged, small, pale, wet, desperate. They surrounded me, but did not touch me. A single hand reached toward me, and I woke to find my own hand wet, even though I had been sleeping under dry blankets. I tried leaving Los Angeles, tried leaving California, but every hotel room smelled faintly of the ship. Every harbor, every gust of ocean air carried a whisper I could not understand, yet knew was a warning. I accepted then that the Queen Mary didn't want me aboard. Not exactly. She wanted my memory, my witness, my stories. And now she followed me everywhere I went, a persistent passenger, a shadow that never sleeps. I write this not as a confession, but as a warning. If you ever find yourself aboard the Queen Mary at night, alone, hear the voices, see the shapes, feel the pressure, do not fight. Remember, witness, do not leave anything unsaid. The ship will take note, and if you try to walk away, she will follow you. Because the Queen Mary does not stay docked, not in the harbor, not in history, not even in your mind. She waits, always.